Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining for our panel today, Improving on Nature, Public Art, and Landscape Design. In just a few minutes, we're going to look forward to diving into an intelligent and very dynamic discussion. We would like to invite you all to submit any questions that you may have for our panelists through the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Before we begin, we'd like to introduce our moderator, Josh Cooperman, the associate publisher and online editor of Interiors California magazine and the host of Convo by Design. Thank you so much, Josh, for leading today's panel. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Christine. And we're going to do something a little different. Instead of going through individual, just reading off biographies, we're going to introduce you to the panelists themselves. A couple of notes first is, again, my name is Josh Cooperman. I'm the associate publisher and online editor for Interiors California magazine and host of Convo by Design, a podcast for the design trade. After this, we will be publishing the audio from this conversation to Convo by Design. So if you want to hear it again, that's where you can find it. And I know that Christine will also have ways for you to view it again after this is done. If you have questions as we go on through the conversation, we're not going to go to question and answer at the end, but instead, we would encourage you to go to the bottom in the chat feature, type in your questions so that we can have them asked and answered in real time. Very excited about the following conversation about art, nature, and public spaces. And I think it's important to note that, and we're going to get to this, that this conversation was ideated probably about 6 weeks ago. And since then, the world has changed not once, but twice in numerous ways. And it's sort of changed the narrative. And we're going to get to some really interesting ideas, and I hope you enjoy them. First thing I want to do is sort of go around the panel and have them introduce themselves to you. And Wendy, you and I go back the longest, I think. I'll start with you.
Terrific. Thank you so much for everybody participating on this esteemed panel today. Thanks, Josh, for hosting and moderating, and Christine and for putting it together with her team. My name is Wendy Posner, and I'm from Posner Fine Art, and we are a fine art advisory, and we're based in Los Angeles, California. We work with private clients, and we also do a lot of work with corporate real estate developers. We're working a lot within the hospitality industry and also with landscape design and architects.
Sandra?
Hi, so I'm Sandra Block. I've had a long career as an architect, and much of my work has been in the public realm, libraries, museums, and galleries, and a lot of university projects. And while these building types have been reimagined and reinvented dozens of times, the consistent point for me, and the thing which brings me to this panel, and now working as an artist, is the importance of gathering, just people being together, social connection. And I'll just, as a quick little note about how I segued from architecture for over 30 years to working as an artist. I designed a birthday gift for my brother that was not giving him yet another sketch that sometimes would be framed or sometimes would, I don't know where it would end up, but it was a fireball. And the fireball was actually a repurposed, very large antique steel mooring buoy. And I had this idea that I was going to turn it into a fire vessel. But the key here is that while that would have been really interesting and cool, if not risky, I designed it to be in my own hand, my own style, illustrative style. And it was very narrative based. It was about my brother's love of coastal Connecticut, marine environment. And I mention this because it became really a template for me to focus on the things that really matter most to me in my career as an architect. And especially now, it seems so incredibly valuable, where people just simply want to gather and to feel connected. And this is really what I am doing in sculpture. And also most recently working pretty much in Southern California, where the outdoor environment is so hospitable to art in the landscape.
Thank you, Sandra. Juan? You just muted yourself. There you go.
My name is Juan Ospina. I'm the principal landscape architect at Hoffman and Ospina Landscape Architecture. We're based out of West Hollywood, California, and also Spring Branch, Texas. We do work around the country. So we do have 2 offices where we focus on hospitality and high-end residential with selective commercial jobs, to say the least. We strive to work with our clientele who do have a high taste in art. And my partner and I and our team do work collaboratively to find locations, work with art in nature, make it a part of the experience of a garden. So I am on this panel as the landscape architect who sort of guides people to locations in art sculptures and art gardens. So we focus on how to channel people to certain locations in a safe way. So we are on this panel talking about a few things. So we'll get into it, but we do see it as a landscape architect from a different perspective than the artist, where we are looking at vignettes and how we see it from different angles, the terrains, the slopes, how we get you to and from. So I look forward to sharing some of that knowledge today with the panel.
Thank you, Juan. Gaston?
Yes, my name is Gaston Isoldi. I'm the director for the Americas for the show Maison et Objets in Paris that takes place twice a year, one in January and one in September.
Thank you, Gaston. And last but not least, Evan.
Hi, my name is Evan Snyderman. I am the co-owner and founder of R & Company. We're a design gallery in New York City, specializing in historical and contemporary design. We represent both sides of the design world and really are focused on the sort of deep historical significance of design. We do a lot of publications on the designers we represent, and also trying to preserve the history of 20th century design specifically. In the gallery in New York, we have a vast library and archive that's open to the public when we're open. And we built this library for the sake of research and discovery, which is one of the things that drives us as dealers. I personally was a artist, a conceptual artist and a performance artist before I started my gallery. So one of the things we look for in the designers we choose to represent are the really sort of avant-garde, let's say, or the radicals, or the people that really push boundaries and blur the lines between all of the arts and the media out there that help people be creative.
Thanks, Evan. And you know what, I want to go right back to you, because one of the things you said is when we're open, which almost seems like a throwaway line to some, but it's really not. And it goes back to the point that when we first started talking about this conversation, you know, we were at the very beginning of the pandemic, and it was a health issue, and it was going to change the way that we do business. Then society changed dramatically and violently all at once. And it's necessary change, but with necessary change, almost to Sandra's fireball concept, you know, when things change, you were directly, I think everyone has been directly affected by this in one way, shape, or form, but you were directly affected by this. 2 galleries, you got hit in New York through civil unrest. Tell me a little bit about the experience, and specifically how, due to these situations, you have to sort of pivot the way that you're doing business now.
Right. Well, it was certainly a big, shift that we had to make. I think in many ways we're fortunate in that we are a private gallery, and we can be agile, and we can make significant changes very quickly when need be. And we have been through difficult times before. My gallery is located about 9 blocks away from the Trade Center. So after 9/11, we had a major shift we had to deal with. And of course, we've been through the 2008 financial crisis, when again, we had to revisit how we did business to try to survive. And I think a lot of it comes down to, being creative and being open and being able to kind of change course quickly. So of course we've been affected. The gallery's officially closed, I think March 13th. but we have found new ways to continue to stay engaged with our clients, which is something that is key, to keep dialogue going, conversations going between clients, but also between all the artists we represent, who are also at the same time we're worried, so of course are they, on how things are going to transpire over the course of the next who knows how many months. So, we were able to shift to, creating online exhibitions, and we started to create sort of talks, Zoom talks with artists and architects and friends and collaborators to kind of keep these sort of conversations going, let's say, and that's been surprisingly fun and actually relatively successful in the sense of, we're going forward and things are moving forward, although at a much different pace. We still don't know where things are going to land, or, it's a little bit of a juggling act, knowing, can you reopen the galleries? When does it make sense? And this is a whole huge conversation of how are things going to change, because obviously things will not be the same for any foreseeable future, nor in many cases or many ways should they be. I think this was actually, in some ways, an opportunity for us to make significant changes to the industry, to the way we do business, to the way we think about things, which maybe was a much needed break, because as everyone in the art world and everyone on this panel obviously knows, things have been moving at a great breakneck speed for the last 10 or 15 years for most of the people in the art world and the design world. And it was almost becoming, unsustainable in terms of how things were happening. So maybe it's now time to reevaluate all that.
I think those are great points. I will tell you, I have not heard the word fun used in describing recent events in a long time, and it's very refreshing. So I think that's fantastic. Wendy, Evan brought up a number of points, and I want to go to you. Evan in particular. Now it's sort of the art space in general. You see a lot of changes. What is changing? What does this look like going forward?
Well, I think that first of all, when the lockdown first started, one of the things was to really evaluate and talk to different people within our industry. So we spent the first 8 weeks really having dialogues and conversations. The first shift really started with the cancellation of Art Basel in Hong Kong. So that was back in January when China was just really, sort of at the peak of the COVID epidemic. And from that, all of the galleries had already shipped all of their art to Hong Kong. They already had their teams in place to go to Hong Kong. And so the art fair had to really pivot very quickly to be able to keep their exhibitors intact, as well as all the art collectors who would normally be traveling at that time to go to the fair. So that was one of the first sort of eye-openers that, if travel gets shut down, and so much of our arena was really predicated on this art fair circuit all over the world, month after month, and whether it was an art fair or design fair, that was going to change because travel was going to come to a stop. So how are you going to then reach your global target audience? And from that, in the conversations we had with the different galleries and all the way down to our art shippers and art handlers, we started to see that this is not going to be the same on the other side, that the retail gallery space, the art fair space, all the travel was going to shift. And it maybe was for the best, because the overhead and the expense of traveling and doing all these different events is quite costly. So we started looking at different ways that art could be exhibited, whether it was in the virtual space and or in a public space, because there was still the opportunity, going back to the sort of premise of our conversation today, about social distancing. And one of the things that people, I think, miss from all of these different events is the social engagement. And so as a potential art collector or someone who's interested in art, right now you can go and view a lot of exhibitions online, you can visit museums online, but you're still doing it as a solo person. So you're not having the same kind of contact that you would if you were going to actually a gallery opening. So how do you recreate some of that environment in a safe space, which would be outdoors in a public space. And so it's looking at how do you take exhibition programming and moving it outdoors and having social engagement safely. But then also looking at, we're seeing pop-ups of drive-by art fairs. Drive-in movies are coming back. So it's changed sort of the ideals of exhibition programming. In addition, I think the advancement within the art industry, as well as that the technology wasn't being utilized to its fullest, where in interior design and architecture, there were certain technological applications that were being utilized for even doing renderings, 3D, CAD, showing virtual showrooms and things like that, that was being implemented, but it wasn't being done within the art world. And now we're seeing the art world sort of transitioning. And it started with the onset first of private viewing rooms, which are sort of microsites of a gallery, which could be a part of an art fair and or exhibition. But now we're seeing it taken into a 3D space. And while some of it is still sort of fundamental and rudimentary, I think that through the situation with COVID and this lockdown, it's really been a time of innovation. And I think that art world needed a little bit of a shakeup, and this is a perfect opportunity to explore some of those new arenas.
Thanks, Wendy. I think that's great. And, it's funny, the next logical step from that is really over to Gaston. You produce one of the iconic design trade fair events in the world. And I'm just curious, looking at this, you talk about a pivot, and you talk about changing things, and how do you do your event in this environment? What is the process you've gone through and are still going through with the current state of and future of Maison et Objet?
Well, basically, Josh, we take some parts in consideration. We have different parts playing in an event, as you all know. So we have the most important part is from one side is our exhibitors, and the other one is the buyers. So we have in each edition 3,000 exhibitors and 80,000 visitors coming from all over the world. So that's the first thing that we have to take these two in consideration, plus the government, not only the government in France, but also the governments elsewhere. So we have to consider that they can probably have a quarantine coming into France or when you get back to home. So those are the things that we consider. And so the logistic part right now, for example, for September, we took a decision just 2 weeks ago to cancel the show in September because of that. We wait until the very last minute just to having more clarity in the horizon, and then we said, okay, we have to cancel it. Having said that, going back to Wendy's point, we create a digital fair that will take place in September from the 4th to the 18th. And we took advantage. The good thing is that we have already the platform. So we developed a platform like 4 years ago, and we invest several millions of dollars to create that platform that's called MOM. So we have a marketplace already in place. The only thing is that we have to adjust a few pieces to get it as a format for the digital fair. And that we just announced it yesterday officially. So that will take place in September from the 4th through the 18th. Having said that, today we'll already open the registration for the January show, which takes place from the January 22nd through the 26th. And going to your question is, we have to consider many points to create a safe environment for that show, physical presence in Paris. The show, it's a massive show, as some of you that doesn't know. It has a 1,300,000 square footage of just only stands. So it's huge. So you have to take care. Now, working with the government, we are leading the group of trade show organizers in France to create, jointly with the government, all the safety measures that we have to have now in all the trade shows in France. And that's going not just only for the show, but also public transportation. Our show is outside Paris, so we rely mostly in the public transportation. So we need to having that in consideration in order to move the people from Paris to Villepinte. And from there, we have to redesign the entire show. which means no wider aisles and no obviously sacrificing some stand spaces, because no we need to, and that is no redesign the entire floor plan and having no more security checkpoints in all the places. And but having said that, we don't have to stop the flow of the people. So we passed through that, and certain point in the checkpoints with the terrorist attacks that happens in France a couple of years ago. So, and that we work on that as well. And the terrorist attacks happened in November, and we had the show in January, and we exercise very quickly how to do it and work with authorities. So right now we're doing the same thing. It's like, right now we are doing first, this digital fair in September, and working very closely with the authorities and also with our exhibitors to make sure that we have a safe and successful show in January.
It's really interesting to hear you explain this, because nothing kills the experience like logistics, right? And unfortunately, that's where we are today. And so I'm curious, going over to Juan, to you for a second, talk about landscape and nature as canvas. And specifically, as we talk about less opportunity for people to go out and experience, because we have to have social distancing, and to Gaston's point, you have checkpoints in some places, you have security measures you have to take. It can lessen the experience. And then there's the whole idea about taking these exhibitions and making them virtual. When you talk about a landscape experience and nature, there's so much to it. You have all five senses working at the same time. How do you approach landscape, nature, and trying to get that experience in whatever sense, and knowing that you have to be as flexible as you have to be right now? What's your approach?
Well, thanks for the question. It's got three parts to it. But as far as landscape and nature and how we deal with the public is sort of for us is a primary user, and the public safety is a primary user, is how to and get from A to B in a landscape. So the logistics of a design in nature correlate to all of the things that we're talking about. We have set standards in our industry, construction industry, for widths of walkways, appropriate risers, appropriate space for 70 people. And we have calculations within these standards that allow us to have a flow of 800 people in 3 hours. How many people can you get with this width of a walkway? So I think the standards now are going to be sort of changed because of all the new COVID restrictions, our 6-foot social distancing. We've always talked about private and personal space in our industry, but now it's even further distance. So it is going to be a challenge in keeping everyone playing by the rules. As you can see in different parts of the world and different parts of the country, there's a lot of misconceptions of what the virus is and how effective it really is on the outside or indoors. A lot of people are now pushing people outside because they feel that airflow is much better to sort of delegate the issues of the pandemic. But they're still there. They're still on the outside. They're still on surfaces, which we also have to be concerned about. So how to get people to an art exhibit being safe in a format where we're all on the same page, I think are critical points to consider. You can see it in supermarkets where we have one ways to flow, and as long as sort of everyone follows that, maybe it's a possibility. But you could just see by the logistics Gaston was discussing, we're facing that in every industry, just in construction in general, how to move products from A to B. There's a lot of logistics that are altering all of our experiences. And the virtual experience is one thing, but I think people are needing and craving that exterior experience. And I think we can do it, like Wendy was saying, drive-by fairs, and maybe there's a little bit more opportunities to consider that, to have maybe longer drives where we can see the artwork until we figure out and resolve the issues. But I think the virtual versus the reality are far by different because of the wind, the smells, the vignettes that you see when you're standing in certain positions, as opposed to a virtual where you can't feel or smell or touch. So hopefully we can find standards that would be suffice for us all, Josh.
Sandra, to that point, and as an artist, has this changed the way you view your work? Has this changed your creative process? Has this changed the way you want your work to be seen? Has it changed what you do? Rather, let me re-ask the question. I know it's changed. I'm curious how.
Well, I almost feel like I've arrived at a perfect moment in terms of what I have been most passionate about. And I have to say that we have to make a shift in attitude and perspective about whether or not this is social distancing or physical distancing. And I think if we look at it as physical distancing, just as Juan was describing it, we're not going to have sidewalks that are suddenly 6 feet wide or wider. I mean, we're kind of stuck with some of these design standards, many of these design standards for the long haul. So in terms of what I do, what I think about, both as an architect and as an artist, is, as Juan was describing, this choreography of the experience. And I'm trying to think of it in terms of a very positive social gathering experience or connection to nature. I design things which, by and large, are to be part of a place, creating a sense of place, creating a destination. So being in the outdoor environment is natural to the work that I'm doing. I've kind of extended my thinking about how the art experience and a sense of connection to nature or narrative can find new and interesting places that hadn't really been thought of before, or maybe not as creatively. So a recent idea that I'm pursuing is the design of shade structures, where it's an opportunity like street artists who just find a blank wall, say, well, that's a good spot. I'm kind of looking around at how can we introduce and integrate the art experience, the communal experience. It's not just art. And I don't mean to say it's not just art, but this sense of a shared experience, a way to connect people through an artful form. These are the things that I'm exploring. I mentioned the first piece of a fireball or fire vessel that really surprised me. The impact that this had, where it went beyond the functional of a fire pit, and it so engages people. And I think that that's in the context of our conversation now, and the importance of making a pivot and a change. I think that art can really show the way, artists and creative people can really show the way in a very positive form.
I love that, and I love the segue, and I want to sort of lead into something. What I'm going to do is, Wendy, I'm going to actually start with you on this one, and then what I'd like to do is just make this an open forum. So please comment as you see fit, because I think it's important. I think it's really important, and we had this conversation briefly when we all spoke the second time. Between the first time we gathered and the second time we gathered, there was a massive protest that everybody watching is fully aware of. Something really interesting came out of that. It's not a first. Is the sense of expressing oneself, as all artists do, through their work. And I think everyone who's here, as well as everyone who's watching this, has seen the George Floyd mural. Mm-hmm. Everyone's seen it. I first really noticed this. I've noticed this, growing up in LA in the 80s. I saw the rise of street art, right? But I've never seen it before to the extent when Kobe Bryant died. the murals of Kobe Bryant and Gianna popped up around the world. I've never seen anything like it to that extent. And, you know, Wendy, you and I have had this conversation about public art before, and Sandra is talking about it here, just sort of how the experience of experiencing, bringing in, viewing, and emotionally connecting to art, public art, right now, especially being locked down, everyone feels like this is never going to end. This particular one's going to end. It will most likely happen again in the future, but this one's going to end. We will be back to some sense of normality. And I'm curious, Wendy, you know, you're very familiar with the art world and public art in particular. Sort of talk about this concept a little bit and how you think that's changing the art, no pun intended, but the landscape of art today.
Right. Well, I think that going back to the fact that, I mean, you know, what we've seen, you know, over the last month and a half is all the political art that has been being displayed throughout cities, not just, you know, nationally, but internationally. So, you know, with the Black Lives Matter and with the protests starting, that it was an opportunity where different people, whether it was tagging and or actual murals that were being painted on the sides of buildings, it became an opportunity to express and to also to show a certain respect or a certain political point of view. And you can see historically throughout time that during times of like turbulence, change, political upset, that it's a great way and it's an opportunity for artists to be able to get to really be completely unfiltered, I think, at this point. I think that we've seen the rise of a lot of very interesting artists presenting very intense political information and material. And it's something that's very raw and is unedited. This is not something that was a curated exhibition. This came from the people, for the people, and by the people. And to be able to experience it on the streets where everything was happening is why it's so poignant and really important right now.
Evan, how do you take that experience and format it, conform it to a virtual environment? Because that's kind of what you need to do right now in your world. How do you blend the two between art and experience?
That is a difficult thing to answer. I don't know quite honestly how to do that myself, although of course I think it has to do with conversations and in dialogue. That is the closest thing you can get to. Obviously, when we can eventually do private viewings in the gallery, as we're already starting to do, we'll bring back some of that experiential work. But, you know, I think that the bigger topic that Wendy was talking about that we're getting to is this you know, the bigger changes of how, you know, how to deal with systematic racism and how we're going to deal with that in the public space, right? Because that's going to be a huge shift. And I think how we were talking last time, we kind of had this almost like a new WPA kind of concept coming. Maybe there's like Black Lives Matter might represent a new era of a kind of larger scale public art program where statues need to be replaced by things that represent different communities in a different way, which will be really exciting for the future of art and the contemporary scene that we all exist in. I mean, in New York City right now, of course, it's going to be really interesting to see when the dust settles and things start to come back. I mean, they're just starting to come back a little bit now, but you know, if you go through Soho and all the windows of the stores which are boarded up are covered in graffiti and in artwork and murals and wheat pasted posters. I mean, it's actually really beautiful. You know, this kind of public art we haven't seen since the subways used to get painted. You know, if you go back through the 70s and the 80s, I mean, I was in love with subway art. I mean, the way that the trains were painted when I was a kid, why can't we do that again? I mean, that was such a beautiful display of creativity. And if you thought about that as an opportunity, the MTA, which is $7 billion in debt, took that as an opportunity to try to, you know, get some major artists or even unknown artists and street artists to come and paint those trains again. I mean, there's a whole, there's a lot of opportunity is what I think is what it comes down to. Obviously, it's a long road, long road ahead of how to change those things, because a lot of it has to come from governmental changes, which is, we can, but certainly we can all do our part in the art world to start this conversation, to start those to make those changes. The little changes we can make will have a bigger effect down the road. So what we're basically trying to do now is figure out what we can do, what we can contribute, how we can make a change in how we represent artists and who we represent and why, and that sort of thing.
Can I just make a comment on that note? There's a couple things, Evan, you're talking about the graffiti and street art, that happened in the subways, in the 70s and 80s. And it's interesting, a lot of those artists ended up becoming very renowned and sought after artists that ended up moving from the streets to like more traditional art formats and becoming very successful. So I think that there is that transition into commercialization of that work, which is interesting. And you look at, even with like land art installations, there is a fine art biennial that takes place in Palm Springs in the Coachella Valley, which was started in 2017, called Desert X. And artists went out and like selected different locations and different sites for the creation of site-specific work. And the success of Desert X was so interesting because there were an opportunity for people who never had engaged with art to all of a sudden come and see art in a natural landscape. And it was overwhelmingly successful. And it was almost like geocaching for art. So art can create conversation. Art is something that not everybody is going to like what they see, but if it sparks or piques some sort of dialogue or interest, then that's part of the thought, I think, that goes into it. So it's interesting to see the transition, from some of those more traditional settings to utilizing, non-traditional settings.
Let me just add something to what you're saying. And Evan, just thinking about curation. It's so important to have that historical context. And we're all looking for that. We're living in an historical moment. How can you as a gallerist bring that headset really to the rest of us who are maybe encountering art in a new and public space, to see this as being part of a continuum?
Yeah. Good question. That's what we were working on. Exactly. How to curate, more, all of our exhibitions, we've always been very thoughtful in what we've tried to put out there. And we have several big projects actually in the works, which are very specifically about diversity. So I'm excited that those will be, of course, that they're going to take a little longer to put forth now to the public, but yeah, it's something that we were already working on, which is great. But we still, like I said, have a long ways to go, and that's just very tip of the iceberg, But the Public Art Forum is something that is really can have a real major impact, because that's, Desert X is great, but not everyone can make it out to the middle of Palm Springs to see those things. Where do you put art that the public can really see it? It's got to be in the inner cities. It's got to be in places where everyone has access to it. That's the challenge.
Well, I think that that's one of the things that came out of, the civil unrest, is that it was on the streets, it was in the neighborhoods, it was in different communities, and it was representative and indicative of different voices. And it was more inclusive because it was the people that were out there protesting that were making and creating this art to take a stand.
Yeah. In some parts of Santa Monica and Venice and LA, they're using art as a way to heal. So after some of the looting, while there were other people protesting, there were some groups who wanted to, instead of going to protest, they were going to an art gathering where everyone's painting walls and sort of healing through their display on all of the vacant walls that we have currently in LA. So there is a way where people are using the public art to heal And also just watching people draw their signs and sort of dolly up their own personal signage of what they're trying to get out to the public has been also interesting, just watching and seeing. And some people really put a lot of heart into it, and they might not be artists. They're just people with emotions. And I think emotion drives a lot of art. So it's kind of a sort of a big shift in the streets for public art and public awareness of the public art.
I have a question.
Are you guys having the same fireworks like explosions on the West Coast as we are in New York City?
Yeah, that's nationally, and that's not going to stop for a while.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, but hopefully it would stop.
Yeah.
Question. Gaston, I kind of want to start with you on this one, and then I also want to open this up to everyone. This panel, as you look at us, we talk about diversity. We are not very diverse. Diversity is not easy to do. Gaston, as you look at the event moving forward, how do you approach, because we talk about the diversity in the work itself, how do you approach the idea of introducing diversity into an event like yours? And I want to also say that it's also it's a touchy subject, and it has to be done deliberately and carefully and with proper tone and proper respect. How do you approach that?
Well, I do believe that it's a very good question, but I do believe that we always be that way in terms of offering a very open platform for everybody. It's because we curate all the pieces from all over the world. So, for example, it is part of our DNA to put the spotlight in good designers and given the opportunity for everybody. So now and I'm sorry to speak a little bit more about the edition, but this is the perfect example. So we, in every edition, we award a designer of the year, which is a senior designer. We also award 6 rising talents, and we choose different countries. For example, 2 years ago, we select 6 rising talents from Lebanon. And probably, you can see that, okay, it is not part of the usual, core to select, rising talents from Lebanon. And you can have many other countries. And we used to have, from the US in the last edition, or Italy or UK, and we choose Lebanon. And that is part of, the diversity. It's like, for us, we show diversity through the pieces itself. And when you go deep, through the pieces and you go to the story behind the pieces, you will find the diversity. It's not that we say, okay, we have to put the spotlight just only in a group of artists. It's like, no, through the pieces, you will see that we are a very open and very diverse platform, because it's not a matter of, gender, culture, religion, color of your, it's just only for the art itself or the design itself.
Juan, question for you. As both Evan and Sandra were talking about, the art in hospitality and art in public spaces and art, being encouraged through the expression of clients and their work. Now we're seeing this purge of public statues across the country, across the world. It's not a new concept, but I can't recall a time when it's happened at this particular level. How do you view, you have to take the political climate into in your mind when you're putting projects together, and you do work on a global scale. What do you see? How do you approach that?
Wow. Without getting into without getting into politics, one of the things we brought up was the work by Wiley of the proud black man. on a horse with his jeans and his hood and his sneakers, Rumors of War by Wiley, which was presented in October of 2019, before all of this was sort of being shaken up. But he made an impact to say that we should be commemorating important things, not things that were of disgrace to certain people. And we're seeing more and more of these plazas, which were once places for gathering, where these statues resided all over the world, are being torn down and toppled over. And they're noticing a lot of them are toppling over very easy, because it was certain parts of the world, these movements were intended as part of a signage. They were not there as a hail to this person. They were signs specifically to be implemented across the world. Again, those purposes are being toppled over right now. So the language has been received, and you can see the public responding in their own way, that they don't feel as a generation that some of these statues should be commemorated and should be held at a high level, because the times have changed. And our goal is in viewing art in a plaza or in a space like that, is how do you maintain peace throughout the entire plaza? So how do you curate spaces where you're not hurting someone's feelings, which is very difficult. And I think that's where art is so fun and diverse, where one picture has meanings for everybody. So the curating movement ahead is just trying to look at history and making sure that we don't sort of make similar mistakes, if you can say there were mistakes, in curating a plaza for the public space. It's different when it's a residential and it's private. It does change when you consider public space art. It does take on a different sort of format, and you look at that subject matter much different than a private.
So we're running low on time, and I wanted to end this with one question, same question for each of you. It's very easy to focus on all of the things that are negative and all of the challenges that we have moving forward. I would like to know, and Wendy, I'll start with you on this one. What are you most optimistic about moving forward, specifically as it relates to the topic at hand, about how art, we started out talking about art in nature, right? But I think art as a salve for society, as something that helps us express ourselves, that helps us move forward in turbulent times, and helps us communicate more effectively. What are you most optimistic about moving forward?
I think that, first of all, art can change the world. Art can create conversation, dialogue. It can be representative of so many things. And I think through this period of time that I think the amount of innovation and creativity that is happening on so many levels is really exciting. I think that there are people who are going to utilize this time, positively and with optimism, and look at, you can't look at the past, you can't live in the present, you have to live in the present, you can't look at the future. So what are you going to do now? So rather than wasting the time to use it. So I think that there's so much innovation happening on every level within our business. And I think that it's brought to light, through not only COVID, but the political situation right now across the globe, that there's going to be some really outstanding, innovative new art to be seen everywhere from this.
Sandra?
Yeah, I was thinking about public art and these landmarks that many of us would just walk right on past. And now they've taken on such iconic meaning. It's an opportunity to empower everyone, really. And that is the positive message, is that art can be that language. It's inclusive. And you don't have to be an artist to be empowered by art.
Interesting. Evan?
I also see opportunities, whenever there's adversity, good change can come, and change is always good. Whether it's difficult or not, it's a good thing. And I think that this moment has forced all of us to rethink how we conduct business. And I think if that affects even just a fraction of the people in our world, in our industry, then real change will come. So I think that that's exciting in many ways. Yeah, I feel positive for the long-term future of at least this movement that's taken hold.
Gaston?
It's basically more of what my colleague said. Is I believe that this is a turning point, absolutely, and that there is a moment to rethink things, 360. And as Sandra says, now that involves us, all of us. It's not that you have to be a designer or an artist to understand or to be involved in the creation or something in a different space. So I believe that all of us in our particular industries are also as citizens, with the cities, you have to be active to rethink the public art. Absolutely.
Juan, final word on this?
Oof. Thank you for that.
A lot of things in these few months, and one of those has been the lack of food supply that's available, that could be readily available around our streets.
Uh-oh, we lost
around.
him. There you go.
I just think that there's an opportunity to somehow be able to develop a little bit more edible fruits for citizens, so that when
Okay, we totally lost your audio, Juan. Sorry about that. But you know what? I do love what you ended that with, and maybe art as gardening as part of the landscape art experience.
Yeah, it has to be.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Your audio's back.
All I was saying, I see that there's a lack of connection between community, our streets, and I'm thinking about how we can sort of create the infrastructure so that if we do have these other dips of pandemics, we can sort of feed our public. Thinking about public plazas as well. I've just been seeing a lot of these protests going on in these open spaces, and I look around and I just wish they were done a little bit differently, thinking about more of the user as a whole to bring communities to talk. So I think optimistic for me, for views, would be to consider in my work, how do I address those issues, those weaknesses that I'm seeing, both for the pandemic, for the inequalities, and how to engage our community and develop our community as well. So I am going to be pushing a little bit more to help sort of bring the community a little bit closer and try to be involved more with the city, with where I live, and try to make sure that the elected officials I have in these cities can help supply and supplement both our art culture, our environmental culture, and hopefully we can find room in plazas where we can meet to discuss issues amongst equal parts and be able to see art in the same respect while having conversations about new topics or new laws that we're going to try to acquire. So that's the optimistic I see. I see a lot of changing for people wanting to socialize in public spaces to discuss politics as opposed to just being indoors. So I do see a lot going on in my city, at least, that I'd like to change. So.
Thank you. I think that's great. And Christine, I'm going to turn this back over to you in just a minute. The last thing I wanted to say is, first of all, I wanted to thank this panel very much. Wendy, Sandra, Evan, Gaston, Juan, thank you very much for doing this. Just a reminder, and Christine will tell you where you can find this in video, but we will also be publishing this to audio. The last thing I want to say, I want to thank you all very much for taking the time to join us today. And just remember that this isn't going to last forever. Art is one of those things that will get us through. And between now and then, wear your mask. Christine, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Josh. That was an exquisite conversation. Thank you, everybody. That was wonderful. It was on point. It was political. It was very much of the times. And thank you all for being involved. It's a very prestigious group today. We did record the session, which is great. You will all receive a link of this. We would encourage you to blast it out to your own database. We'll be doing the same, which is a pretty robust database of the industry, not just the art world, but everything else in between in the A&D world. And so it's going to, I think, be received quite well. We received a wonderful audience today too. And we only had one question, ironically, that came up, but I think it's because everybody was so vibrant and interesting that people pretty much heard what they needed to hear. So thank you all for doing such a beautiful job today. And thank you, Josh, in particular, for navigating this so well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
you all.
everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thanks.